This is episode 699 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drangmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. Wally, a lot going on this week, but we'll start off with the fact that the man who allegedly set fire to Republican Party headquarters here in Albuquerque has been, they believe, found. The man's name's Jameson Wagner. He is, I think we'll just go with a lot of the things you would expect from a guy who would firebomb the Republican Party headquarters, and allegedly as well that he set fire to a Tesla dealership up the one near Bernalillo. So uh, glad that they found him, and this will be an interesting one to keep an eye on in terms of the process and how it moves forward.
Yeah, no doubt about that, Paul. That this is a national story. A lot of the national feeds I got had this one on there, and it's an important issue. These things, I don't know. For it seems like in my lifetime have gotten a bit more frequent. I was alive, although not. In grade school, you're only so news aware. But it seemed like the '60s had quite a few of them as well. But we certainly are getting a lot of these kind of issues. Attack the Tesla, which this was attack the Tesla and attack the Republicans. So we'll see what happens. The reporting I saw, this is America's legal system. There is no such thing as an open and shut case, but the evidence, at least that was reported, seems overwhelming, and I think it's highly unlikely that he won't do some jail time.
Yeah, I think 20 years is what I saw as uh, the likely sentence if he is found to be guilty of these attacks. So um, we'll, like I said, just keep an eye on the situation and hope that no further or similar attacks happen. This is not what we need as a society for sure. In slightly more optimistic news, I don't know how you want to take this, but races for both governor and mayor of Albuquerque uh, are filling up a little bit. Of course, mayor of Albuquerque is coming in November of this year. Governor is not for another year, so that'll take place in November of 2026. But uh, being that it is the highest position in all of New Mexico, uh, you could argue U.S. Senate seats, but uh, Heinrich was just talking about jumping into the governor's race from a U.S. Senate seat that I would say is pretty comfortable for him. So you get the idea. Anyway, we'll start with the mayor of Albuquerque. It looks like a five people competing with Mayor Keller, if I'm not mistaken, or five people. We had Eddie Varela on. We're going to work to get others, but the latest addition is Louis Sanchez. He is what I would call a moderate Democrat, a non-Tim Keller Democrat. They've certainly sparred as Louis has been a member of city council and Mayor Keller's been in office. Louis happens to be on the west side of town, and he is my city councilor. So we'll definitely work on getting him on the show to find out more. But I would say that between him and Darren White, those are probably the two candidates that I'm looking at as the most likely to come out of this. Basically, the way I see it is that you're going to have Keller on one side and then these other candidates duking it out, and somebody in that runoff will then run against Keller one on one. So um, we'll see if any of these guys can get over the top. But the fact is that I think the field for mayor of Albuquerque is probably all set, and now we need to find somebody to represent the west side in my district over there. in the city council. So,
Yeah.
any thoughts on the mayor's race
Well, a
there?
couple of quick things. There's two Louis Sanchez's
Yes, he's
that
not
have,
the gun range owner.
yeah, exactly, that have been involved in politics. And believe me, there's more Louis Sanchez's out there. And if you are one, that was not meant to disrespect you in any way, but two that have been involved in politics. So
Yeah,
this is the one that is the city council, not the one that is the shooting range gun store owner.
right.
Paul, I think, it's one of those. Just to throw a model out there, there's two models of how we pick our politicians. Identity politics is one, and policy, likely policy, is another. And man, if there's ever a time where I think it matters, if it's ever mattered less, the identity politics of candidates for governor and mayor, and it means more what the policies are and what they're likely to do, I think this race is one of those because. It's one of those things we can check boxes. And oh, by the way, Mayor Tim Keller, white male. Oh,
Mm.
he doesn't check any of the boxes. But again, we don't talk about that because when you're a Democrat, you kind of get a little bit of a pass in there for some reason. But I do think what policies would these candidates advocate and work to implement in the state and in the city of Albuquerque is going to be hugely important because by my judgment and by most, things are not moving along and in an expeditious, positive way with regard to governance here in New Mexico.
No, absolutely. I think it is evidence that it is time for a change here in uh, Albuquerque, the largest city in the state of New Mexico. I told Bob Clark, and I've told other people, so I might as well say it here. I would vote for a dead dog over Tim Keller.
Mhm.
So whoever wins the, what you could call it a primary, whoever gets to the runoff, and we're assuming, of course, that Keller does not get 50% of the vote in the first round of voting. I assume at this point that the Keller machine, the hardcore progressives, are going to show up and vote for Keller, and that he will be in the final analysis in the final two. Nothing would make me happier than not to have that situation unfold, but my assumption is that it will be a runoff between the other candidates and getting that final person, and then they will have basically a month to duke it out with Keller. But the voters of Albuquerque, I would love to be surprised and see, two other candidates, whoever they may be, running. I would at least know that there's a light at the end of the tunnel and it's not an oncoming train.
Yeah, and Paul, it's tough to even know this for how the election unfolds. It's ostensibly nonpartisan, meaning they don't run as Republican, they don't run as Democrat. Everyone knows who's a Republican and who's a Democrat. They always put that out there, and as you said, there's a lot of flavors of the Democratic Party these days, from the anarchist. Socialist left to the more moderate middle, and it will be a very interesting race. And then, yeah, this is one of those things too. If you're in it to win it, odds are you need to be prepared and have resources not only to be the top two, but to then work on that second election, the runoff election. And it just seems to me that you need to make a big splash in the first round to even have a shot at the second. Uh, because when it comes to name recognition, no one ever has better name recognition than the incumbent, and that's certainly the case here in Albuquerque for mayor.
Yeah, I would agree with you in general. Obviously, people know the parties, but here's my hot take, if you will. I would say Darren White is a fairly moderate Republican and Louis is a fairly conservative Democrat. And I wouldn't necessarily say that they are light years apart ideologically, even though they are obviously of different party backgrounds. So um, the others, I think, to me, it's safe to say that Eddie Varela is probably more on the conservative side. And if he can gain some traction, he'll be a contender as well. Then we have Maylene or Miho, who right now is on deployment from in Guam, I believe. And when she comes back, we'll see what she can get going in her race. And Patrick Seiss, who's a Republican who ran for the legislature, probably the least well known candidate. So, any of you folks want to give us a jingle? Would love to have you on the show. Of course, Eddie's already been on. And we'll go from there. But moving on to the state level, we, of course, had the announcement of Sam Bregman, district attorney here, longtime, uh, you know, activist, long involvement in New Mexico public policy and politics, one-time chair of the Democratic Party. So he and Deb Haaland both being chairs of the Democratic Party, currently the only two people in the race for governor. And what's your take? You've been around longer than I have. What's your take on Mr. Bregman?
Well, compared to Holland, he would have to be more in the moderate side of things. And
That's an easy
no,
that's an
but
easy
you
path.
know what? You got to say that though, because and the other thing, Paul, it's very interesting is Bregman on the national reporting is being called the father of the Boston Red Sox baseball player. So it just shows in the national media, despite him being in politics all the time, he gets second billing to his son, even in his announcement for governor. But I listened to a bit of his announcement talk, and some of the stuff I was nodding my head strongly yes, and some I was thinking, oh, maybe not the best. He was talking about public schools and going to class, and certain things, topics that have been talked about here on Tipping Point, New Mexico. Some things with regard to Medicaid is he's of the Medicaid is the most important thing ever for New Mexico, so don't touch it, and we'll keep adding more people, and the feds need to just go about their business. So, he's not unique among Democrats with that position for sure. But I do think that we will see some differences between he and Deb Holland, and then it's going to come down to what kind of race is going to be won. I sort of have a feeling that she will do the a lot of commercials, a lot of structured events, but not a lot of getting out and talking to the people. And I don't want to, it can't be this bad, or knock on wood, it can't be a la what Biden did this last time, where I think Bregman is going to be much more of the Bruce King variety of running for governor. He'll go from town to town, shake a lot of hands, talk to a lot of people in person, and to the extent every dollar he has, also put that into media. So it'll be interesting to see how the style of the campaign goes out. And again, if the issues become important, or is this just going to be, the identity of the candidates is going to take over, particularly in the primary for the Democrats?
Yeah, well, from our perspective at the Rio Grande Foundation, I would say that I am very interested in doing our part the best we can to flesh out the differences on policies beyond crime between Sam Bregman and Deb Holland, specifically economics, specifically education, constitutional liberties, including gun rights. I don't think Bregman, from what I can tell, is a defender of the Second Amendment, which is no surprise there, given his long tenure in Democratic politics. So, what I want to make sure does not happen is that a candidate such as Michelle Lujan Grisham did in her reelection bid makes it through without really putting forth any economic plans, any specific plans outside of abortion and a few other hot button issues. I want, and I think this is to, quite frankly, Bregman's advantage in a sense. Here's the challenge Bregman faces: is that I think the progressives dominate the Democratic Party. So having Bregman running as the perceived moderate, Certainly on crime, I think it's safe to say that he would be more moderate, but his crime
And moderate means you're against crime. For if you want a shorthand
right.
way of figuring that out, where I'm not so sure the far left progressive, I think they almost like crime, or at least their policies
Yeah,
seem
they
to
like the
indicate that.
chaos, it
Yeah.
seems. So the question is, how far to the right can Shannon Bregman go and not lose large numbers of Democrats? And I'm sure that they are polling and focus grouping this as we speak. And this is going to be, I think, the critical components of this campaign. Now, this is maybe my favorite and greatest segue in the history of the show, because we just saw the governor sign the semi-open primaries bill up in Santa Fe. So, what does that mean? Well, it essentially gives independent voters a superpower, if you will. The superpower is that you can show up in a primary election, i.e., for governor, and choose whichever party you want to be voting for on that day, if and only if you are an independent registered.
Yes.
So, does Bregman, does his campaign, does some perhaps nonprofit set up to help Bregman work the angle of getting Republicans to move into the Democratic primary this election as a means of helping him win that race? Now, being somebody who's more on the conservative side, I obviously think that would be a good thing for the state of New Mexico and potentially a winning strategy for Bregman, because he is a white man. Let's just face the reality. Now, that doesn't mean that Deb Haaland's going to have, say, oh, the Native American vote locked up or anything. She's Pueblo. The Navajo are not happy with her and not necessarily seeing her as one of their own. Uh, the Navajo, due to the Chaco Canyon leases that she canceled with her being Department of Interior, they had a protest. They had outrage against her. Now, is that a group that's going to kind of represent all the Navajo? I don't know. That's beyond my knowledge base. But it this open primary law potentially gives Bregman a alternative source uh, of support relative to the progressive machine that I think it's safe to say Deb Haaland has locked in. And by the progressive machine, I mean that is a state, but also a nationwide group of supporters who are already funding her campaign to the nines.
Yeah, no question. And Paul, to be clear, that that voting change wasn't a constitutional amendment,
It was
right?
not
It's a
correct.
bill, so it goes into effect basically before the next election. So, yeah, the other issue is whether if and whether they do or not, large numbers of Republicans become independent for the primary may depend on how many and how any chance of winning candidates come through on the Republican side. So if there were a couple of candidates who Republicans think, oh, either one of those have a good chance, but I like this person, that might dampen it a little bit. But and again, certainly not. This is not scientific, but all things being equal, this is New Mexico, and if you have a statewide race and you don't know anything about it, uh, and you were to bet Democrat every time, your winning percentage in the last decade would be very, very high. No question about that.
Yeah, and obviously we'll be following this race closely. I think it's safe to say that Bregman is going to have to appeal to moderates and potentially crossover Republicans in order to win. But he has to give them something, some reason to vote for him. And I just for the Rio Grande Foundation's sake, we're going to send out surveys. We're going to ask the candidates about their positions on taxes. We want to see what the Republicans have in terms of candidates and more to it. But fascinating dynamic already set up there on the Democratic side.
Well, and yeah, Paul, to be clear, what are the odds that Deb Holland would ever fill out such a survey for the Rio Grande Foundation? You tell me. Based on history, we would love it, right?
Right?
Will it happen? We'll see.
Yeah, I'm not counting my surveys yet. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, you have a blog post in backup in case that doesn't happen.
Yeah, I'm not even convinced Bregman would, but he should. I hope he is much more. Uh, you're right. You talked about him trying to be a more of a retail campaigner and much more forward and active. I do think Deb Holland, they are going to strategically want to kind of protect her against tough questions. Not that the media is known for their tough questions here in New Mexico, but uh, other random people, a Joe the plumber type character could ask her a tough question, and I just don't think that is where they want her to be for a lot of reasons. But um, the governor stopped, or the governor's bill signing concluded on Friday at noon. So that was the end of the bill signing session. And I guess with it, you could argue that that was the the conclusion of the full cycle of the 2025 legislative session. Uh, I was on with Bob Clark on Friday morning, and I told him, watch the tax bill and watch this lobbying disclosure bill. And those are two that I think it would be good if the governor vetoed. And I know we've talked about my ongoing efforts to try to understand MLG and her views and takes on some of these policy issues that we've obviously had our differences of opinion on. But have, I nailed it for once. I
Yes.
nailed it. Those two were really concerning bills in their own respective ways. So we've talked fairly extensively about the tax bill. Um, I think the governor, it's safe to say, it's more of the numbers don't add up than this is a kind of crappy bill. It did have a 2-year extension of the gross receipts tax exemption for medical providers, but that doesn't go away until 2028. So they can
Right.
easily come back and deal with that again in the future. It should have never been a temporary thing. They should just exempt the GRT permanently. The rest of the bill was the alcohol tax increase and this kind of bogus earned income tax credit that really is not good policy across the board. Yes, it gives low income people a certain amount of tax relief, but it also becomes refundable, which means that if you don't pay any taxes, you get money from the state. Um, just a real mess. So
When places like Mississippi are getting rid of their income tax,
yes,
for example.
yes. So we're happy to see that bill vetoed. That was HB 14. It was a very complicated bill. And while the governor had some interesting remarks about that bill in talking about how it's not prudence, it's paralysis, and that that the legislature, let's see, her other point was that
There was a funding
it
concern.
lacks both strategic coherence and fiscal responsibility. I think we might just make that the state motto. Lacking strategic coherence and fiscal responsibility could be the state motto of New Mexico, and the governor rightly pointed that out. Doesn't mean we agree with her across the board. She didn't put a budget with tax reduction in the original proposal before the session, as the legislature did not put any money aside for tax reduction. Um, it's terrible policy making and legislating. The governor's just as guilty, if not more, than the legislature, but she does happen to be correct on this one piece of bad legislation.
Yes, and Paul, Also, during the session, she wasn't there the whole time, other than, just we think back to the Richardson era where that guy was engaged with legislators, lobbyists, and the public during the session on a daily basis. She was off politicking in parts away from New Mexico. And so, that whole thing about strategic coherence, whose job might that be, or who could take that? It would seem like the governor, working hard and working ahead, might have had a little more of that. But yeah, uh, but the blame has been shifted. Those bad legislators, so they didn't do it. Don't disagree with her statement again on that one, as you say. Every now and then she says something that's right. Most politicians do.
They're all guilty.
They're all
Guilty, guilty,
guilty.
guilty. Yeah, a
Yeah.
lot of guilty to hand out here. Of course, yes, the governor could have engaged more directly in the process and encouraged the legislature. Yes, she had a State of the State address. Yes, she put certain ideas forth, but uh, she and there's no question, based on what I'm going to tell you in a few minutes, that the governor and the legislature's relationship is at its end in many ways. But
Yes.
before we get there, the other bill is HB 143. It was a lobbying reform bill that set up all kinds of hoops and all kinds of uh, policies to make it really difficult, just functionally difficult for people to lobby, whether they're a paid professional lobbyist or somebody who represents a nonprofit like Rio Grande Foundation and just goes up there to talk about specific issues with legislators. It would have really set up a onerous proposition up there. I think it was well done to veto that one as well.
Yeah, Paul, in somebody's lobby, that bill's just, are you for it or are you against it? Well, guess what? It's always gray. There's bills out there where you're vehemently opposed to it on the beginning. They make amendments. You might be a little more, and at the end, you could be for it, or vice versa. What about the dummy bills? I'm against all dummy bills because those are used at the last minute at 11 o'clock at night, close to the end of the session, to put in stuff that they didn't want to talk about in the light of day with the public watching them. So there was so much to be disliked about that bill, and yet at some level, uh, who knows? Here's the other thing. Let's require legislators to state whether they're for something, against something, before they even know what's in there, too. Because they say, well, they vote at the end. Yeah, but what about at the beginning? That's what they were asking lobbyists to do.
Yeah, and lobbyists get a bad rap, quite honestly. Just like with everything else, it's the attitude and the knowledge base and the interests of the legislature to act or not act, and obviously the governor as well. But those are the people that drive the policies in Santa Fe, making it more difficult to operate as a legislator. I mean, yeah, you don't want outright bribery and those kinds of things. And at least from a legal public approach, that doesn't happen. Whether there's things that happen behind the scenes that we are not privy to and that are truly illegal, that's a different question. I don't, quite frankly, see that much of that kind of thing happening. But we have the situation we have in New Mexico because the voters vote for people who have con- no common sense, no understanding of free markets, limited government, educational choice, constitutional liberties, gun rights,
Business.
energy, the whole, just focus on that. That is the real issue. And of course, it goes without saying that the anti-lobbying bill was put in by Representative Sarah Silva and Jeff Steinborn, two of the furthest to the left legislators in the entire legislature, possibly history of New Mexico. But sorry to
Oh, no
we
problem.
the governor wasn't done there
But
yet,
she didn't quit there.
and here is where her animosity to the legislature and arguably high school students, or at least one high school student, rears its head. She vetoed the tortilla as the state bread bill and a lowrider license plate. And the
Why does the governor hate our culture and hate lowriders? We don't know.
Yeah, she says there are misuse of time and priorities.
She's not wrong there.
She's not wrong, but the whole process was a misuse of time and priorities because, as I've said probably last week or maybe 2 weeks ago, nothing good passed the legislature, really, period. The only bill of note to the Rio Grande Foundation that passed the legislature was the essentially stating clearly that school districts have the ability to keep the
Right.
4 day school week. But of course, the governor vetoed that, and there was no override done. That was passed unanimously in both houses, as was the initial override in the House. So, uh, yeah, I mean, it's a waste of time. Okay, this is what the legislature does. It's not just a lawmaking body, it is a social body. It is a body that does all kinds of things to, you know, highlight New Mexico's unique culture and whatever. And this was a high school kid from Las Cruces, I guess, that had this idea to put a bill forth to make tortilla the state's official bread. Uh, I mean, again, what was the governor's, what bill or what proposals did the governor want to see passed that were not passed? Because I can pretty much guarantee that whatever the governor was wanting that the legislature didn't give her was not a good thing
Right.
for we the people of New Mexico. So um, I think it's a good thing that the governor doesn't have to run again, because if you put a campaign up with some young high school kid who wanted the tortilla, just it's vindictive. It's unnecessarily petty for the governor to do this the way she did it.
Yeah, Paul, and just listening to you talk, I think maybe you could put +2 on the tortilla bill and the lowrider bill because on the rating of legislators, because yeah, that if that stopped other legislation from being passed, it was probably bad.
There you go.
Oh.
Well, that would be a +8. He filibustered something.
Yeah,
Yes,
exactly.
Bill Scherer would rock it to the top. Um, all right, so the Freedom Index results have been put forth. So go and check your legislators and their scores. The thing that I want to specifically point to right now is that we did something a little different. We averaged up the scores for each session of the legislature going back to 2014, the very first year we did the Freedom Index. So, by figuring out the average score, you're figuring out, well, is this a year in which lots of bad ideas are moving in the legislature, or a year when, heaven forbid, some good ideas are moving through the legislature? So there's a few patterns here, Wally. Uh, One pattern is that, I know this is simple math, but scores in 30-day sessions tend to be less extreme than 60-day sessions. Well, of course, there's more bills in a 60-day than a 30-day. Bill pre-2019 scores tended to be higher in the legislature. Why is that? Well, for 2 years, 15 and 16, you had Republican majorities in the House and a Republican governor, which is basically the high watermark in a modern New Mexico history. Uh, so you actually had positive scores in the Freedom Index for those 2 years. Then 17 and 18, the Democrats gained control, but Martinez was still there. So nothing too crazy that you knew, oh, the governor's going to veto
Right.
this. It's not going to move very far. 2019, worst year ever in New Mexico's legislature. The average score was minus 200.
Wow.
The worst score this year was about minus 200, Andres Romero. So 2019, the land of the Energy Transition Act and many other bad ideas. Of course, why would that be such a bad year? Well, you had 8 years where the progressives, the hard left, their entire approach to legislating was kind of bottled up. It was a bottle called Susana Martinez, and she could veto anything that she didn't like. So 2019 was a really terrible year. 2021 was not great, but not nearly as bad. I think the average score is probably a 70 negative. Then you get up to 2023, closer to 50, and we're just a little worse this year than we were in 2023, like probably 65 negative, minus 65. So uh, no good years since 2019. But things can change. We obviously can move back to that crazy halcyon days of those crazy halcyon days of 2015 and 2016, where the legislature actually was generally pushing good legislation onto the floor and voting on it. I know it's almost mythical at this point.
Yeah, it is mythical. And Paul, I would say I have another observation is that the ratings are important, but that's on legislation that is acted upon and voted and made it to the point where you could take a vote. I think, just based on the polling of the New Mexico electorate, what's important to them, crime, homelessness, uh, education, less so, healthcare, very important. And when you look at the things that are important to New Mexicans, based on what they say, and a lot of these actually align the general public of New Mexico in terms of what they're concerned about is much more closely aligned with the Rio Grande Foundation than the legislature or the governor. They didn't even work on most of those. They just pretended they didn't exist and went about their business. And that is, I think that is their great risk legislatively is, man, just do something that the people care about.
Yeah, I could not agree more. Um, Wally, we've got too much to talk about, so we're going to leave the tariff discussion to the side for this week. I think it's something that we'll be able to bring up it'll be a new evergreen topic for us. But let's just say that major changes were made to the tariff structure. Now China is very much in the crosshairs, but certain things are being carved out of those tariffs, including electronic items that China may more or less have a monopoly on, including like assembly of iPhones and whatnot. But I do think that it's further roiling the economy, and it's going to have long-term impacts, and it's still not good even at the current status that it is in terms of 10% tariffs on everybody else. Um, it just it's changing very, very quickly, and that's uncertainty is right up there with bad policy in terms of its negative economic impact. But we'll have a more detailed conversation. We have a little less going on in a given week. I was on the Economic Development Department's website, Wally, and I noticed they still have the original deal for our good old friends at Maxion listed there. All the details, 1.9 million square feet complex at Mesa del Sol, all the economic development figures. But it's been 5 months now since they pulled the plug, Maxion did, on that particular plan. And they're still planning, allegedly, to move into a much smaller former Honeywell facility of 110,000 square feet uh, in Albuquerque. That it's an existing building. Interestingly enough, and I know we've talked a lot about the stock market's gyrations recently, but Maxion, way back when they canceled their original project, the Journal, Albuquerque Journal, noted that Maxion's stock price was trading at $7.36 per share, a 99% drop in value in 2024. Well, I believe it's Homer Simpson who said it's not the worst stock price ever. It's the worst stock price so far for Maxion. Paraphrasing Homer Simpson. $3.18 a share was their last trading price there for Maxion. So my point being that the price of Maxion stock has continued to decline. Actually, as I read this morning, it is below $3 per share. So I have not seen any news reports, and I expect that you haven't, because I think we read the same publications as to whether there's been any permits pulled, whether Maxion has gotten rolling with their much downsized 110,000 square feet facility. But I do think Economic Development Department uh, should take down this misinformation that they have on their website.
Ooh, maybe the Misinformation Bureau, the Politburo, can take a look at that.
Ooh,
But yes, Maxion, their stock does not look good. And if you look at their chart, we've had a lot of volatility in the stock market because of the tariffs, but you can't tell it from Maxion. It's just a steady downward
right.
trend. And so not a lot of people are buying or selling it. The volume's low and the price is low, and just another one of these things that New Mexico uh, made a bet on that maybe may or may not ever amount to anything.
Yeah. And I know we've joked a lot about the congressional uh, portfolio
Yeah.
in terms of its rapid increase. Perhaps an alternative strategy would be to short sell the New Mexico portfolio, which includes uh, SPCE, aka Virgin Galactic. And
Yeah.
we don't have time to dwell on this one either, but the headlines are certainly there about this all female space flight, 11 minutes. Jeff Bezos, not Virgin Galactic, Blue Origin, which is exactly the business model that Virgin Galactic is theoretically supposed to be in here in New
Right.
Mexico, launching people up on these relatively benign, short term, time in space kind of launches. Um, we haven't talked about it, but Virgin Galactic stock is also not performing well. And I think one of the untold stories here is that Blue Origin seems to be moving into the business model, the market that is served by Virgin Galactic, or at least was served by Virgin Galactic until they went on hiatus. So that's something to keep an eye on. And last but not least, we'll conclude with normally in most cities and states across our union, the fact that the National Guard has been deployed to your major city would be a major headline. And it's a big deal. Certainly made national and even international news that our esteemed governor had deployed the National Guard to Albuquerque, where Mayor Keller is running for reelection and saying, gosh, this town's just getting safer and safer every day I'm in office here. Please reelect me for a third term. But it is kind of, you could say, almost misleading the way the National Guard is being deployed. The governor's office says they will be deployed in May, uh, relating to security and traffic control at critical incidents, medical assistance, and humanitarian efforts along Central Avenue. That could be a fun activity for them. Prisoner transport unit assistance, transit security enhancement, metro court security support, aviation and sunport security assistance, shield unit case preparation support, APD drone program operational assistance. My understanding is that they will not be armed, which if I'm doing work in the war zone, I think
That could be, man, that's a problem for anybody doing any law enforcement function.
right. So, uh, your take on this announcement?
Yes. So there's a number of things, man. We have the rules that APD operate under are horrible. The leadership at the top in terms of dealing with the issues of homelessness, street crime, fentanyl use, and the like, it's all horrible. Are more resources pointed at that going to help? It depends on what on what the process is. So if we're going to continue to do catch release and relocate around our city, will anything change? Maybe not. So we'll see. It also national coverage. The National Guard's a big deal, and they're like they're reporting this as a big deal.
Mhm.
Most New Mexicans, most Albuquerqueans, including us, we kind of are yawning about this one because it's like, is this really going to make a difference? I will say that when the state police came to Albuquerque, when APD was unable to make certain arrests, I did notice an improvement there.
Mhm.
But will this have a similar impact? Maybe it will, maybe it won't. But the fact that they're not law enforcement, they don't have guns, and they're going to be largely doing, I don't know what you call it, traffic keeping functions. If those traffic keeping functions get the APD out there doing police keeping functions, maybe maybe it'll be an improvement.
Yeah, I would agree 100% that from a direct perspective, it does not look like this is much more of a nothing burger than any substantive kind of attack on crime. If anything, I almost see this as more of a political attack from the governor. You know, she must have woken up on the wrong side of the bed uh, last week when she was signing those bills, because then she decides to go with the National Guard in Albuquerque. Basically trying to pull kitty cats out of trees. Like that's it sounds really big, and it of course is not going to look good for Tim Keller as he runs for reelection, which I'm all for. I would vote for a dead dog over Tim Keller. I repeat, but the what the net impact of this is going to be is probably a lot less than even the state police. I did notice a little bit of an improvement with the state police, so it's not quite balloon fiesta. Like, we got like crime scales in Albuquerque. Balloon fiesta is like when things magically. It's like Xi came to San Francisco and suddenly everything was really cleaned up over there. So
Yeah, whatever policies and protocols you do during the balloon fiesta, let's do those all year.
yeah. All right. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to the show at Apple, Stitcher, or tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.